Have you ever sat alone on a Friday night, wondering if anyone would notice, if you simply disappeared? Elaine Morrison knows that feeling all too well. She's a 62-year-old high school literature teacher in the small town of Millbrook. For 37 years, she's graded papers alone, eaten dinner alone, and gone to bed alone. Her colleagues have retired to homes filled with grandchildren's laughter. She comes home to silence. But tonight, walking through the quiet streets after a late school meeting, something will change forever. She'll meet Adrian Blackthorne, the man the town whispers about but no one truly knows. He's been alive for over 4 centuries, and he's just as lonely as she is. He has a proposition that will shake her quiet world. He needs a companion to end his eternal solitude, and in return, he'll give her what she fears losing most, time itself. What happens when 2 people who have lived with loneliness for so long finally find each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to Millbrook High School like a memory that refused to fade. Elaine Morrison stood at her classroom window, watching the first yellow bus pull into the circular drive, its headlights cutting through the October gloom. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, feeling the vibration as 30 teenagers thundered past her door toward their lockers. Room 237 had been hers for 37 years. The same faded motivational posters hung on the walls, their edges curled with age. Reading Opens Worlds proclaimed a poster featuring a stack of books beneath a rainbow. She'd bought it during her 2nd year of teaching. When she still believed she'd have stories of her own to tell someday, her desk bore the weight of routine, a red coffee mug with a chip on the handle, a stack of essays on Romeo and Juliet that needed grading, and a small silver frame. The frame had contained her parents' wedding photo for 20 years, until their deaths 5 years ago. Now it sat empty, its glass reflecting nothing but the fluorescent lights above. "Morning, Elaine." Sarah Chen poked her head through the doorway, her arms full of science textbooks. At 58, Sarah was 4 years younger, but looked a decade older, her hair grey and pulled back in a practical bun. "Good morning." Elaine turned from the window. "Ready for another day in paradise?" Sarah laughed, a sound that seemed to echo in the empty hallway. "As ready as one can be for teaching photosynthesis to teenagers who think plants eat sunlight like cereal." She paused, studying Elaine's face. "You okay? You look tired? Just another restless night." Elaine straightened a stack of papers that didn't need straightening. "You know how it is," but Sarah didn't know, not really. Sarah went home to her husband of 32 years and their twin sons, who called every Sunday. Sarah had grandchildren who sent crayon drawings and Christmas wishes. Sarah had a life that extended beyond these walls. The first bell rang, and students began filtering into the classroom. Elaine knew them all, their writing styles, their family dramas, their college dreams. Jessica Martinez sat in the front row, always eager, always prepared. Behind her, Tommy Walsh slumped in his chair, baseball cap pulled low despite the no-hats policy she'd stopped enforcing years ago. In the back corner, quiet Amy Sinclair clutched her worn copy of Shakespeare, the margins filled with careful notes. "Good morning, scholars." Elaine's voice carried the practiced warmth of decades. "Who can tell me what Juliet means when she says that which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet?" Jessica's hand shot up. "She's saying that names don't change what something really is." "Excellent. And what is she really talking about?" "Love," Amy whispered from the back. "She's saying their names, Montague and Capulet, don't change how they feel about each other." Elaine nodded, feeling the familiar flutter of pride when a student grasped something deeper. "Names are just labels. What matters is the essence beneath." She paused, looking out at their young faces. "Sometimes we let labels define us, teacher, student, old, young, when what we really are goes much deeper." The lesson continued, but part of her mind drifted to the empty frame on her desk. What label defined her? Spinster, old maid? Those cruel words her mother had whispered during their last fight, 23 years ago, still echoed, You're too particular, Elaine. Too set in your ways. Love requires compromise, but compromise with whom? The few men she'd dated over the years had wanted to change her, make her more social, less bookish, someone who preferred sports bars to quiet libraries. She'd chosen solitude over settling, books over disappointment. Now at 62, the choice felt less like wisdom and more like fear. The lunch bell brought blessed silence, while other teachers gathered in the faculty lounge to share stories and complaints. Elaine remained in her classroom, eating a turkey sandwich and grading papers. The essays were typical, teenage interpretations of star-crossed love that focused more on the romance than the tragedy. "Love conquers all," wrote Jessica. "Romeo and Juliet prove that true love can overcome any obstacle." Elaine sighed, writing in red ink. "Consider the ending, Jessica. Does love conquer death? What does Shakespeare really say about young passion?" Outside her window, the autumn wind scattered leaves across the empty playground. She watched a single red maple leaf dance on the breeze, spinning and twirling before settling on the windowsill. Even the leaf had somewhere to land. The afternoon classes blurred together. More discussions of Shakespeare, more essays to assign, more young faces looking toward futures filled with possibilities she'd never explored. When the final bell rang, most teachers rushed toward the parking lot, eager to return to their families. Elaine stayed behind, as she always did, organizing tomorrow's lessons and avoiding the empty house that waited for her. By 6 o'clock, the building felt like a tomb. Her footsteps echoed through empty hallways, lined with student artwork and achievement certificates. The janitor, Mr. Ramirez, waved from the far end of the corridor. "Working late again, Miss Morrison?" "Just finishing up, Carlos. Have a good evening." "You too. Don't stay too late." But where else did she have to go? Her house on Maple Street stood silent and dark, just as she'd left it that morning. The neighbors, the Hendersons, had moved to Florida 6 months ago. The new family had young children who played in their yard, but never acknowledged the quiet woman next door. She drove home slowly, taking the long way past the town square, where couples walked hand in hand under the streetlights. The old Victorian houses glowed with warm light, their windows revealing glimpses of family dinners and evening conversations. Her own house sat at the end of the street like a period ending an unfinished sentence. Inside, she poured herself a glass of wine and settled into her father's old armchair. The television murmured in the background, some cooking show featuring a family preparing Sunday dinner together. She reached for her current book, a biography of Emily Dickinson, and tried to lose herself in someone else's chosen solitude. But Emily had her poetry, her passion, her secret correspondence with the world. What did Elaine have? 37 years of teaching other people's children, a mortgage nearly paid off, and a retirement account that would fund a quiet old age spent exactly as she spent her present, alone. The wine made her maudlin. She found herself standing before her bedroom mirror, studying the lines that had appeared around her eyes, the grey that now dominated her brown hair despite monthly touch-ups. When had she become invisible? When had she stopped being a woman and become simply the English teacher? Her reflections stared back, neither beautiful nor plain, just unremarkable. Average height, average weight, average everything. She'd been the kind of woman men looked through rather than at. The dependable friend who listened to their romantic problems but never inspired their passion. The clock chimed 10. Time for bed. Time to repeat tomorrow what she'd done today. Time to grade more papers and teach more lessons and come home to more silence. She set her wine glass in the sink and turned off the lights, preparing for another night of restless sleep in a bed too large for one person. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending more leaves skittering across the pavement. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, a lonely sound that seemed to echo her own heart. She pulled the curtains closed and tried not to think about how many more nights like this stretched ahead of her. In her dreams that night, she walked through endless empty hallways, calling out to voices that never answered back. The grandfather clock in Adrian's foyer chimed 9 times, each note reverberating through the silence that had settled between them. Elaine stood in the doorway, her rational mind screaming at her to leave, while something deeper urged her to stay. "Please, sit!" Adrian gestured toward a burgundy velvet sofa positioned before a fireplace where flames danced without any visible logs. "You look as though you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." Her voice came out smaller than intended. She remained standing, her purse clutched against her chest like armor. "I should go." "I don't know what I was thinking, walking onto private property like this. You were thinking that your life has become too predictable, too safe, too empty." His words struck with uncomfortable accuracy. "You were thinking that something has to change, or you'll disappear completely." The truth of it hit her like cold water. She sank onto the sofa, her legs suddenly unsteady. "How could you possibly know that?" Adrian moved to the window, his silhouette framed against the night sky. "Because I've been watching you, Elaine. Not in a way that should frighten you, but in the way someone recognizes a kindred spirit." He turned to face her, and in the firelight his features seemed both ancient and timeless. "I've seen you walking past this house for months, always alone, always lost in thought. I've seen the way you linger at your classroom window, watching other people's lives unfold while yours remains static. That's—" She started to protest, then stopped. What was the point of denying what they both knew to be true? "You want to know why I know your name, why I've been expecting you?" Adrian sat in the chair across from her, close enough that she could see the unusual color of his eyes. Not quite blue, not quite gray like storm clouds over water. "It's because we're more alike than you could imagine." "I don't understand." "Loneliness recognizes loneliness, Elaine. Isolation calls to isolation." He leaned forward, his gaze intense but not threatening. "I've lived in this house for longer than you might believe possible. I've watched this town change, watched generations grow up and grow old and pass away. I've seen families form and children born and lives lived to their fullest, all from the outside, always from the outside." Something in his voice, a weariness that seemed to echo through centuries, made her chest tighten. "How long have you lived here?" "Longer than should be possible for any mortal man." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I'm not like other people, Elaine. I'm what folklore calls a vampire, though the reality is far different from the stories you may have heard." She should have laughed, should have stood up and walked out, convinced she was speaking to a madman. Instead, she found herself studying his face, noting details she'd missed before, the way his skin seemed to glow in the firelight, the absence of lines that should mark a man his apparent age, the stillness of his chest as if breathing were optional rather than necessary. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it? Or is it simply improbable?" He rose and moved to an ornate writing desk, returning with what appeared to be a leather-bound photograph album. "I have lived through 4 centuries, Elaine. I have seen the American Revolution, the Civil War, both world wars. I have watched this very town grow from a frontier settlement to what it is today." He opened the album, revealing photographs that chronicled decades of change. Main Street when it was little more than a dirt road, the high school when it was a one-room schoolhouse, the town square before electricity brought streetlights to push back the darkness. And in several of the images, always in the background, stood the same figure, tall, lean, unchanged by the passage of time. "This is me," he said quietly, pointing to a photograph dated 1923, and this, another, from 1886, and this, a daguerreotype from 1854. The image faded, but unmistakably showing the same man who sat before her now. Elaine's hands trembled as she touched the photographs. The evidence was impossible to deny, yet impossible to accept. "But why are you telling me this? Why now?" "Because 400 years of existence have taught me something precious about life, that time without companionship is not living, it's merely existing." He closed the album and set it aside. "I have wealth, intelligence, experiences that span centuries. I have read every book, traveled to every continent, witnessed the rise and fall of empires. But I have never had what you see in the windows of those houses you pass each evening, someone to share it with." The fire crackled, filling the silence with sound and warmth. Elaine found herself thinking of her empty house, her quiet dinners, her solitary walks through a life that had become smaller with each passing year. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking you to consider a possibility that may sound insane, but offers something you've never had: time. Unlimited time to read every book ever written, to see every corner of the world, to become everything you've ever dreamed of becoming." His voice was gentle, persuasive without being pushy. "I'm asking you to become like me. You're talking about—" She couldn't say the word. "Immortality." "Yes." He leaned forward, his pale eyes holding hers. "But more than that, I'm talking about companionship, about sharing an eternity with someone who understands the weight of solitude, who has felt the ache of too many empty nights." The offer hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Everything rational in her mind rejected it as fantasy, delusion, madness. But something deeper, something that had been starving for decades, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the answer to a question she'd been afraid to ask. "This is crazy," she said finally. "Is it crazier than spending the rest of your life grading papers and eating dinner alone? Is it crazier than retiring to an empty house and growing old with only books for company?" His voice carried no judgment, only understanding. "You've been dying slowly for years, Elaine. What I'm offering is the chance to truly live." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window where she could see the lights of town twinkling below. "I need time to think about this, of course. This is not a decision to be made lightly." Adrian rose as well, maintaining a respectful distance. "But know this, the offer is real, and it comes with no condition save one, that you choose it freely, with full understanding of what it means. And if I say no, then we'll have shared one evening of honest conversation, and you'll return to your life with the knowledge that someone, somewhere, truly sees you." His smile was sad but genuine. "Though I hope very much that you'll say yes." Elaine turned back to him, this impossible man with his impossible offer. "I should be terrified of you, perhaps. But are you?" She considered the question honestly. She should be frightened, should be running from this house and this conversation and this man who claimed to be something that couldn't exist. Instead, she felt more awake than she had in years. "No," she admitted. "I'm not terrified. I think I'm hopeful, and that scares me more than anything else. Hope is the first step toward change." Adrian moved toward the door, clearly understanding that she needed space to process what she'd learned. "Take all the time you need, Elaine. I've waited 4 centuries for the right person. I can wait a little longer." As she walked back through the night toward her empty house, Elaine carried with her the weight of an impossible choice, and the first real hope she'd felt in decades. Behind her, warm light glowed in the windows of the Blackthorne mansion, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone in the darkness. Sleep eluded Elaine that night. She lay in bed, watching shadows move across her ceiling, her mind churning through the impossibility of what Adrian had told her. Every rational thought insisted it had been an elaborate hoax, some cruel joke played on a lonely woman. But the photographs had felt real beneath her fingers, and Adrian's eyes had held the weight of centuries. By morning, she'd almost convinced herself it had been a vivid dream, brought on by too much wine and too many years of solitude. The illusion lasted until she found a single white rose on her front porch, its stem wrapped in a note written in elegant script, "For your consideration." The rose was perfect, its petals soft as silk and completely free of thorns. She held it to her nose, breathing in its subtle fragrance, and knew with absolute certainty that Adrian Blackthorne was exactly what he claimed to be. At school, she moved through her morning routine like an actress playing a familiar role. The students seemed particularly young today, their concerns about homework and weekend plans feeling impossibly distant from the choice that now dominated her thoughts. Miss Morrison. Amy Sinclair approached her desk after third period, her worn notebook clutched against her chest. "Are you feeling all right? You seem different today. Just tired, dear. Did you have a question about the assignment?" Amy hesitated, then leaned closer. "Actually, I wanted to thank you for what you said yesterday. about not being invisible. I've been thinking about it all night. The irony wasn't lost on Elaine. Here was a young woman just beginning to question her place in the world, while Elaine faced the possibility of leaving that world entirely. What have you been thinking? That maybe being invisible isn't something that happens to you. Maybe it's something you choose. Amy's voice grew stronger as she spoke. Maybe I've been choosing to hide instead of choosing to be seen. The words hit Elaine like a physical blow. How many years had she spent choosing invisibility over the risk of rejection? How many opportunities had she declined because they required stepping outside her carefully constructed comfort zone? That's very wise, Amy. What will you do with that insight? I'm going to audition for the spring play. I know I probably won't get a part, but at least I'll have tried. Amy's smile was brave and uncertain. What about you, Miss Morrison? Is there something you've been afraid to try? The question followed Elaine through the rest of the day. During lunch, she found herself studying her reflection in the faculty restroom mirror, wondering what Adrian saw when he looked at her. Did he see the same unremarkable woman she saw, or something else entirely? Sarah Chen joined her at the sink, washing paint from her hands after an art class mishap. You've been quiet today. Everything okay? Sarah, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret the choices you made? The path you took? Sarah dried her hands slowly, considering the question. You mean marrying young? Having kids right away? Sometimes, yes. I wonder what I might have accomplished if I'd traveled more, pursued my art seriously instead of treating it as a hobby. She paused, meeting Elaine's eyes in the mirror. But then I think about my family, the life we've built together, and I know I chose well. Why do you ask? I've been wondering lately if I chose safety over living. If I let fear make too many decisions for me. Elaine, you're 62, not 92. It's not too late to make different choices. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. Well, what's brought this on? How could she explain that a vampire had offered her eternity? That immortality might be within her grasp if she could find the courage to reach for it. I met someone who's made me question everything about my life. Sarah's eyebrows rose. A man? Yes, but it's complicated. The best ones always are, Sarah smiled. Just remember, you deserve to be happy, Elaine. You deserve to be loved. Don't let fear talk you out of something that could change your life. That afternoon, Elaine found herself walking past the Blackthorne mansion again. The house stood silent in the daylight, its windows dark and unrevealing. She wondered if Adrian slept during the day, like the vampires in movies, or if that was just another myth among the many he'd already shattered. The White Rose sat in a glass of water on her kitchen counter when she arrived home, its perfection a constant reminder of the choice before her. She made dinner, a simple pasta dish that she ate while reading Emily Dickinson's letters. One passage caught her attention. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose. Possibility. That's what Adrian offered, a fairer house than the careful, predictable prose of her current existence. But was she brave enough to dwell there? The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Her sister Janet's voice crackled through the connection from Phoenix. Elaine, I've been thinking about our conversation last month, about you feeling stuck. Have you considered moving out here? The sunshine might do you good. I don't know, Janet. This is home. Home is where you make it. And frankly, that town sounds like it's suffocating you. Janet's voice softened. Mom and Dad are gone, Elaine. You don't have to keep living their life. You can choose your own. After hanging up, Elaine sat in the gathering dusk and thought about choice. Everyone seemed to be telling her the same thing, that it wasn't too late to change course, to risk something for the possibility of more. But Janet was talking about sunshine and new neighbors, not immortality and creatures of legend. As darkness fell, she found herself drawn to the front window. In the distance, lights began to glow in the upper floors of the Blackthorne mansion. Adrian was awake, probably wondering what she'd decided, probably waiting with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. She thought about Amy's courage in deciding to audition, despite her fear. She thought about Sarah's advice that she deserved to be happy. She thought about Janet's words about choosing her own life instead of living someone else's, and she thought about the weight of years ahead, spent grading papers and eating dinner alone, growing older and more invisible with each passing season, until one day she simply faded away entirely. The white rose caught the lamplight, its petals glowing like hope itself. Elaine picked up her coat and stepped into the night, her heart pounding with fear and anticipation in equal measure. Some choices, she realized, were too important to make from the safety of distance. It was time to face her future, whatever form it might take. The wrought iron gate stood open, as if Adrian had known she would return. Elaine's footsteps echoed on the cobblestone path, each step feeling like a small act of rebellion against the careful, measured life she'd constructed over 6 decades. Adrian answered the door before she could knock, and she wondered if vampires possessed some supernatural awareness of approaching visitors, or if he'd simply been watching from the windows. "I hoped you'd come back," he said, stepping aside to welcome her into the warmth of the foyer. "Though I wasn't certain you would." "I wasn't certain either." Elaine removed her coat, noticing how her hands had stopped trembling. "But I realized I couldn't make this decision from a distance. I need to understand what you're really offering." "Of course. Please come in. I've prepared something that might help." He led her to a different room this time, a library that stretched 2 stories high, its walls lined with books in more languages than she could identify. A fire crackled in the hearth, and 2 comfortable chairs were positioned near a small table set with an ornate tea service. "This is magnificent," she breathed, turning slowly to take in the vast collection. "You could spend a lifetime reading all of these." "Several lifetimes, actually." "Which is precisely the point." Adrian poured tea from a delicate porcelain pot, the liquid amber-colored and fragrant with spices she couldn't name. "One of the greatest gifts of immortality isn't just time itself, but the luxury of pursuing knowledge without the pressure of mortality." Elaine accepted the cup, inhaling the complex aroma. "What is this?" "A blend I discovered in Morocco in 1847. The merchant who sold it to me claimed it could reveal truths hidden in the heart." His smile was gentle, self-deprecating. "Probably nothing more than excellent tea, but I've kept the recipe alive for over a century." She sipped the tea, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "You could have had anyone over the years." "Why me? Why now?" Adrian settled into the chair across from her, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight. "Do you remember what you told your student yesterday? About names being just labels, that what matters is the essence beneath." "You were listening?" "I was walking past the school. Old habits. I've watched over this town for so long that checking on its people has become instinctual." He leaned forward slightly. "Your words struck me because they revealed something I'd sensed about you from the beginning. You understand that surface appearances mean nothing compared to what lies deeper." "I'm not sure I follow." "Most people see an aging spinster when they look at you. A woman who missed her chance at love, who chose books over passion, safety over adventure." His voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. "But I see someone who has been waiting, perhaps unconsciously, for the right moment, the right choice, the right person to awaken what's been sleeping inside you." The teacup rattled against its saucer as Elaine set it down with unsteady hands. "That's a romantic notion, but I'm not sure it's accurate. Maybe I'm exactly what I appear to be, a woman who made safe choices and is now too old to make different ones." Elaine. The way he said her name made her look up, meeting his intense gaze. "What did you dream of when you were 20? Before you convinced yourself that dreams were impractical." The question caught her off guard. That was so long ago." "Humor me." She closed her eyes, letting her mind drift back through the decades to a time when possibilities had seemed endless. "I wanted to travel, to see the places I'd read about in books, the libraries of Oxford, the cafes of Paris, the gardens of Kyoto. I wanted to write, maybe teach literature at a university. I wanted to fall in love with someone who understood that books weren't an escape from life, but a doorway into it." And what happened to those dreams? Life happened. My parents needed care. The teaching position here opened up. I told myself I'd travel during summers, but there was always some reason to stay. And the men I met. She opened her eyes, finding Adrian watching her with an expression of understanding that made her chest ache. They saw books as competition for my attention, not as something to share. I have stood in those libraries in Oxford, walked those cafe-lined streets in Paris, meditated in those gardens in Kyoto. I've read the works of authors in their original languages, watched civilizations rise and fall, seen the world change in ways that would astonish you. Adrian's voice carried the weight of centuries. But I've experienced all of it alone, Elaine. Knowledge without companionship is just accumulation. Beauty without someone to share it with becomes mere observation. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Elaine found herself imagining those distant places, not as destinations for a rushed vacation, but as homes where she could linger, study, truly understand. "You're offering me the world," she said quietly. "I'm offering you time to see the world properly. Time to read every book ever written. Time to learn languages, study art, understand history, not from textbooks, but from memory." He paused. "And I'm offering you someone who will never grow tired of your passion for literature, who will never ask you to choose between love and learning. But the cost, becoming like you, is not as frightening as you might think. The transformation preserves everything you are while removing the limitations that mortality imposes. You would still be Elaine Morrison, just an Elaine Morrison with unlimited time to become everything you've ever dreamed of being." She stood and walked to the nearest bookshelf, running her fingers along leather spines worn smooth by centuries of handling. One volume caught her attention, a first edition of Jane Eyre that must have been worth a fortune. "I've read this book dozens of times," she murmured, "as have I, Charlotte." Bronte had remarkable insight into the nature of love between equals. Adrian joined her at the shelf. She understood that the greatest romance isn't based on passion alone, but on the meeting of minds and souls. Elaine turned to face him, noting how carefully he maintained a respectful distance despite the intimacy of their conversation. "Is that what you think we could have? A meeting of minds and souls? I think we could have something neither of us has ever experienced. True companionship built on shared understanding, mutual respect, and unlimited time to explore both the world and each other's thoughts." His voice was soft but certain. "I think we could build something worth eternity." The word hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Eternity. Not just the promise of more time, but the promise of time well spent, time shared, time that would allow her to become the woman she'd always dreamed of being. "I need more time to think," she said finally. "Of course. But know this, tomorrow night if you decide to join me, everything you've ever wanted to see, learn, or become will be within your reach." Adrian moved toward the door, then paused. "The choice is yours, Elaine. It always has been." Elaine spent the following day in a haze of normalcy that felt increasingly surreal. She taught her classes, graded essays, and attended a faculty meeting about the upcoming parent-teacher conferences, all while her mind churned through the implications of Adrian's offer. During her planning period, she found herself researching vampires on her computer, a task that would have seemed absurd a week ago. Most of what she found was Hollywood nonsense about bloodthirsty monsters and wooden stakes, but scattered among the fiction were older legends that painted a different picture. Stories of immortal beings who were scholars, artists, protectors of knowledge rather than predators. "Planning a Halloween unit?" Sarah asked, glancing over her shoulder at the screen. "Something like that." Elaine quickly closed the browser. "Research for a creative writing assignment." Well, the kids would certainly find it more interesting than another essay on symbolism. Sarah settled into the chair beside her. "You seem distracted lately. Everything okay with your mysterious man?" The question caught Elaine off guard. She'd almost forgotten her earlier confession about meeting someone. "It's complicated. The good ones usually are." "Have you seen him again?" "Twice now." Elaine found herself wanting to confide in someone, to share the weight of this impossible decision. "Sarah, have you ever been faced with a choice that could change everything about your life?" You mean like when Tom asked me to marry him at 19? Or when we decided to have kids right away instead of waiting? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Big choices are terrifying because you can't know how they'll turn out. You can only know how you feel in the moment and trust that feeling. What if the choice seemed impossible? What if it required giving up everything you've known? Then I'd ask myself, what am I really giving up? And what am I gaining? Sarah studied Elaine's face with concern. This man, he's not asking you to move away, is he? If only it were that simple. In a way, yes. He's offering me a completely different life, one that would mean leaving behind everything familiar. But would it mean being happy, being loved? The question echoed in Elaine's mind through the rest of the day. As she walked home, she noticed details she'd overlooked for years. The way afternoon light filtered through autumn leaves, the sound of children playing in distant yards, the comfortable rhythm of small-town life that had shaped her for 6 decades. Was she ready to leave all of this behind? At home, she found another gift from Adrian, a leather-bound journal with blank pages and a fountain pen that looked antique but wrote with modern smoothness. The accompanying note was brief: for recording your thoughts during this time of decision. Whatever you choose, your words matter. She opened the journal to its first page and found herself writing before she'd consciously decided to do so. October 15th. I have been offered immortality by a creature who claims to love me. Even writing those words feels insane, yet I know they're true. Adrian Blackthorne is a vampire, not a monster of legends, but a man who has lived for centuries and is tired of being alone. What terrifies me isn't the impossibility of his nature, but the possibility that he's right about me, that I have been sleepwalking through my life, choosing safety over growth, familiarity over adventure, that I have become exactly what I feared most as a young woman: invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. She paused, the pen hovering over the page. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and she could see warm light glowing in the windows of neighboring houses. Normal families settling into normal evenings, content with their mortal lives and finite time. But what if finite time isn't enough? What if there are books I'll never read, places I'll never see, conversations I'll never have, because 70 or 80 years simply isn't long enough? What if Adrian is offering me not just more time, but the right kind of time, time spent with someone who understands that learning and growing never end? A knock at her door interrupted her writing. She opened it to find Amy Sinclair standing on her porch, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Miss Morrison." "I got a part in the play." "Lady Macduff in the spring production of Macbeth." Amy's smile was radiant. "I can't believe I actually auditioned. I was so scared, but I remembered what you said about not being invisible." "Oh, Amy, that's wonderful." Elaine felt genuine joy for the girl, mixed with a pang of recognition. It was someone just beginning to step out of the shadows, while Elaine faced the possibility of stepping into a different kind of darkness entirely. "I wanted to thank you," Amy continued, "for encouraging me to be seen. It's changed everything about how I think about myself." After Amy left, Elaine returned to her journal. "A young woman came to my door tonight, glowing with the joy of choosing courage over fear. She thanked me for advice. I'm not sure I've been brave enough to follow myself. But maybe that's changing. Maybe I'm finally ready to step into the light, or into the darkness, if that's where my path leads. Adrian has given me until tomorrow night to decide. Part of me wants to say yes immediately, to leap into this impossible future before I lose my nerve. Another part wants to cling to the familiar, to the safe choice of remaining exactly who I've always been. But I'm beginning to realize that staying the same isn't really safe at all. It's just another kind of death, slower perhaps, but just as final." She closed the journal and prepared for bed, but sleep proved elusive. Every sound seemed magnified: the settling of the house, the whisper of wind through the trees, the distant hum of traffic on Main Street. This might be one of her last nights in this house, in this bed, in this life she'd built from caution and compromise. By 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and made tea. Sitting at her kitchen table with the journal open before her, She began making lists, a teacher's habit that had served her well through every major decision. Reasons to say no. She wrote, then stared at the blank lines below. What were the reasons? Fear of the unknown, attachment to the familiar, the possibility that Adrian was lying or deluded. Reasons to say yes. The second list came more easily. Unlimited time to learn and grow. Companionship with someone who valued her mind. The chance to see the world properly. Freedom from the slow fade of aging into irrelevance. And underneath it all, a reason she was almost afraid to write. The growing certainty that she was falling in love, not just with Adrian, but with the version of herself she could become if she found the courage to accept his offer. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Elaine Morrison closed her journal and made her decision. The school day passed in a blur of routine that felt like saying goodbye. Elaine found herself memorizing details she'd taken for granted. The creak of her classroom door, the afternoon light slanting across student desks, the familiar weight of books in her hands. If tonight went as she planned, these moments would become memories of her mortal life. During lunch, she walked through the empty hallways, past bulletin boards decorated with student artwork and achievement certificates. In the trophy case, she spotted a photograph from her first year teaching, 37 years younger, standing beside the drama club after their production of Our Town. The irony wasn't lost on her. Wilder's play about appreciating life while you're living it, and here she was, preparing to choose a different kind of life entirely. Second thoughts? A voice asked behind her. She turned to find Principal Matthews approaching, his expression concerned. About what, Robert? I don't know. You've seemed distant lately, like you're somewhere else entirely. He joined her in studying the old photograph. Everything all right? You're not thinking of early retirement, are you? The question hit closer to home than he could possibly know. Just contemplating changes, I suppose. We all reach a point where we wonder if we're living the life we want. Well, whatever's on your mind, I hope you know how much this place would miss you. You're the heart of our English department. Some of these kids will remember your classes for the rest of their lives. After he left, Elaine stood alone in the hallway, feeling the weight of legacy and responsibility. How many students had she influenced over the years? How many young minds had she shaped? Was it selfish to abandon that calling for a personal chance at happiness? Her final class of the day was discussing The Road Not Taken, and the synchronicity felt like the universe's sense of humor at work. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, she read aloud, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. Frost presents us with a choice that will make all the difference. But notice, he doesn't tell us whether the difference is good or bad, just that choices have consequences that echo through our entire lives. Tommy Walsh, usually disengaged, raised his hand. But how do you know which road is right? What if you pick wrong? That's the thing about meaningful choices, Tommy. You can't know in advance. You can only choose based on who you are in that moment and what you're willing to risk for the possibility of something better. But what if you're happy with where you are? What if you don't want things to change? Amy Sinclair spoke up from the back. Then you're not really living, are you? You're just existing. She blushed as everyone turned to look at her. I mean, staying safe doesn't mean staying happy. Sometimes you have to risk everything to find out who you really are. Out of the mouths of babes, Elaine thought. Amy raises an excellent point. Frost's poem isn't really about roads or forests. It's about the courage to choose growth over comfort, possibility over certainty. That evening, she prepared for what might be her last night in the house she'd called home for over 2 decades. She cooked a simple dinner, pasta with marinara sauce, her father's favorite, and ate it slowly, savoring flavors that might taste different with immortal senses. The leather journal Adrian had given her lay open beside her plate. She'd filled several pages with her thoughts, working through her fears and hopes like a problem to be solved. But some decisions couldn't be reasoned through. They had to be felt. As darkness settled over Millbrook, she dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes and made her feel elegant rather than merely respectable. She applied makeup with more care than usual, styled her graying hair, and stood before her bedroom mirror, wondering if she was preparing for a date or a funeral. Perhaps both. The walk to the Blackthorne mansion felt different this time. Her steps were sure, purposeful, carrying her toward a future she could barely imagine but no longer feared. The October air was crisp, filled with the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter. Adrian was waiting in his garden, standing beneath an ancient oak tree whose branches seemed to cradle the moon. He wore a dark suit that made him look like a character from a different century, and when he saw her approaching, his smile was both hopeful and apprehensive. Elaine, her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "You came?" "I said I would." She stopped before him, noting how the moonlight seemed to make his pale skin glow. "I've made my decision." And she reached into her purse and withdrew the leather journal, opening it to the final entry she'd written that afternoon. "May I read you something?" He nodded, his ancient eyes reflecting centuries of patience. "I have spent 62 years preparing for a life I never quite managed to live," she read. "I have been careful when I should have been bold, practical when I should have been passionate, safe when I should have been sorry. Adrian Blackthorne has offered me something I never dared dream possible. Not just more time, but the right kind of time. Time to become the woman I was meant to be. Shared with someone who sees that woman even when I cannot see her. Myself." She closed the journal and looked up to find Adrian watching her with an expression of wonder and hope. "The teacher in me wants to research this decision, to make lists of pros and cons, to approach it logically. But the woman in me, the woman who has been sleeping for decades, knows that some choices must be made with the heart. Tonight I choose love. I choose possibility. I choose him." Adrian stepped closer, his voice soft with emotion. "Are you certain?" "Once this is done, there's no going back." "I've been going back my entire life," she replied. "Going back to safe choices, familiar routines, comfortable compromises. For once, I want to go forward into something magnificent and terrifying and absolutely right." He offered her his hand, and she took it without hesitation. His skin was cool, but warmed at her touch, and she felt the rightness of their connection in her bones. "Then, let's begin your new life, Elaine Morrison. Let's begin our eternity together." As they walked toward the house, she felt the weight of her old life lifting from her shoulders like a coat she no longer needed. Behind them, the lights of Millbrook glowed softly in the distance, the past she was leaving behind. Ahead lay the unknown, vast as the night sky and full of stars she had yet to explore. Adrian led her through rooms she hadn't seen before, each one more beautiful than the last. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, and oil paintings from masters she recognized lined the walls. The house felt alive with history, every corner holding secrets from centuries past. They climbed a grand staircase to the second floor, then continued to a third level she hadn't known existed. Here, Adrian stopped before an ornate door carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the lamplight. "This is my private study," he said, producing an antique key. "Few have ever entered this room. What I'm about to show you will change everything you think you know about my nature, and yours." The room beyond was circular, its walls lined with books and artifacts that spoke of ages long past. Ancient manuscripts lay open on reading stands, their pages covered in scripts she couldn't identify. Astronomical instruments gleamed on tables beside maps of star patterns. But what drew her attention was the large portrait hanging above the fireplace. It showed a woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, wearing the dress of an earlier century. The face was hauntingly familiar, though Elaine was certain she'd never seen it before. "Who is she?" she whispered. Adrian's voice was heavy with old grief. "Her name was Elaine Blackthorne, my wife of 3 centuries ago." The words hit Elaine like a physical blow. "Your wife? Please, let me explain." Adrian moved to stand before the portrait, his face etched with pain. "Eleanor was everything to me, brilliant, passionate, brave. She chose immortality to be with me, as you're choosing now. We had 50 wonderful years together, traveling the world, sharing knowledge, building a love that seemed eternal. What happened to her?" That's what I need you to understand." Adrian turned to face her, his pale eyes filled with an anguish that spoke of centuries of regret. "Immortality comes with a price I didn't fully understand when I offered it to Eleanor. A price I've hidden from you because I was desperate not to lose you as I lost her." Elaine's mouth went dry. "What kind of price?" Adrian walked to an ancient chest and withdrew what appeared to be a medical journal, its pages yellowed with age. "Every vampire must feed, Elaine. Not just on blood, as the legends suggest, but on life force itself. The hunger grows stronger with each passing decade, and eventually what?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Eventually, we lose our humanity entirely. We become exactly what the old stories warn against, predators who see mortals as nothing more than sustenance." His hands shook as he opened the journal. "Eleanor lasted 90 years before the change began. She fought it longer than most, but in the end, he couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to." Elaine understood, and the understanding filled her with horror. "You killed her." "I had to. She begged me to," in her last moments of clarity. The creature she was becoming, it wasn't Eleanor anymore. It was something that wore her face, but fed on innocence without conscience or remorse. Tears tracked down his cheeks. "I've carried that guilt for 200 years. The room spun around Elaine. Everything Adrian had told her, everything he'd promised, it was all built on a foundation of lies. "And you were going to do the same thing to me? Turn me into a monster?" "No." Adrian stepped toward her, then stopped when she backed away. "That's why I've spent the last 2 centuries researching, studying, trying to find a way to prevent the degeneration. I've discovered things Eleanor never knew, techniques that might. Elaine's voice rose. "You don't know for certain. The hunger can be controlled through meditation, through feeding in smaller amounts more frequently, through becoming a predator." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. "You want me to help you hunt innocent people?" "Not hunt. Never hunt." Adrian's desperation was palpable. "There are ways to feed without killing, without causing permanent harm. Blood banks, volunteers, medical procedures that—" "Listen to yourself." Elaine's anger flared, hot and righteous. "You're talking about turning me into something that needs to feed on human beings, to survive. How is that different from making me a monster?" Adrian sank into a chair, looking older than his centuries. "Because the alternative is continuing to exist alone, watching everyone I could love grow old and die while I remain unchanged. Because 90 years with you, even knowing how it might end, would be worth more than an eternity of solitude." 90 years? Elaine stared at him in disbelief. "You think 90 years justifies condemning me to become a killer?" I hoped that with what I've learned we could find a way to extend that time. Maybe indefinitely. The research I've done, the experiments. The word hit her like ice water. "What kind of experiments?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. "My God," Elaine breathed. "How many others have there been? How many women have you convinced with your pretty words about eternity and companionship?" "Elaine, please, how many?" Her voice cut through his protests like a blade. 3, he whispered, "over the past century. 3 women who agreed to the transformation, knowing the risks. And what happened to them?" Adrian's face crumpled. "The first lasted 60 years before the degeneration began. I had to. I couldn't let her become what Eleanor became. The second made it to 75 years. By then, I'd learned techniques that slowed the process, but couldn't stop it entirely. And the third, Margaret chose differently. When she began to feel the first signs of change 15 years ago, she asked me to let her die as herself, rather than risk becoming a monster." His voice broke. "I honored her choice." The portrait of Eleanor watched over this confession with painted eyes that seemed to hold all the sorrow in the world. Elaine looked up at that beautiful, doomed face and saw her own potential future. Decades of love followed by an inevitable descent into darkness. "You lied to me," she said quietly. "You told me I could have eternity, but what you really meant was that I could have 90 years, if I'm lucky, followed by becoming something that feeds on innocent people. I meant every word I said about loving you, about wanting to share my existence with someone who understands you understand nothing. Elaine's composure finally shattered. You've spent centuries trying to cure your loneliness by damning other people to the same fate. You're not offering me eternal love. You're offering me a death sentence with a delay. Adrian rose from his chair, reaching toward her with desperate hands. Elaine, please, let me show you the research. Let me explain what I've learned. No! She backed toward the door, her heart pounding with betrayal and terror. I trusted you. I was ready to give up everything for you. And all this time you knew that you were asking me to become a monster. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. She reached the door and grasped the handle with trembling fingers. You're a predator, Adrian Blackthorne. Not despite your nature, but because of your choices. You prey on lonely women with promises you can't keep and offers that are really curses in disguise. Don't leave, he pleaded. Don't condemn us both to loneliness when we could have something beautiful, even if it's temporary. Temporary. Elaine laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. 90 years of borrowed time ending in becoming a killer? That's not beautiful, Adrian. That's monstrous. She opened the door and fled, not caring about the grand staircase or the elegant rooms or the centuries of history that filled the mansion. All she cared about was escaping the beautiful lie that had almost claimed her soul. Behind her, she heard Adrian calling her name, but she didn't slow down. She ran through the night toward her ordinary house and her ordinary life, grateful beyond words for their blessed, mortal simplicity. Only when she was safely inside with the door locked behind her did she allow herself to cry for the dreams that had been shattered, for the love that had been revealed as deception, and for the loneliness that stretched ahead of her, unchanged but no longer unbearable. At least she would face it as herself, not as something that fed on others to survive. Elaine barely slept that night. Every shadow in her bedroom seemed to hold threats. Every sound made her wonder if Adrian had followed her home. She'd drawn all the curtains and checked the locks twice, but felt no safer for it. How do you hide from a creature who has had centuries to perfect the art of hunting? By morning, exhaustion and terror had given way to something harder, determination. She couldn't simply pretend the previous night had never happened. Adrian was still out there, still dangerous, still preying on lonely women with his beautiful lies. How many others might fall into his trap? She called in sick to school, the first time in 15 years, and spent the morning researching everything she could find about vampires. Not the Hollywood versions, but the older legends that spoke of creatures who slowly lost their humanity over time. The stories were consistent across cultures, beings who began with human hearts but eventually became monsters that fed without conscience or remorse. By noon, she'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days before. She had to stop him. The realization came not from anger, though she felt plenty of that, but from a deep sense of responsibility. She was a teacher. Her job was to protect young people, to guide them away from danger. How could she live with herself knowing that other women, perhaps students like Amy, who were just finding their courage, might encounter Adrian's seductive promises? But how does a 62-year-old literature teacher fight a centuries-old vampire? The answer came to her as she sat in her father's chair, staring at the empty picture frame that had started this whole journey. Knowledge, research, preparation, the same skills that had made her an excellent teacher could help her find Adrian's weaknesses. She returned to her computer, this time searching for information about how to kill vampires. Most of what she found was useless folklore, but buried among the myths were older texts that spoke of specific vulnerabilities, exposure to sunlight, wooden stakes through the heart, certain religious artifacts. More importantly, she found references to vampires who had been destroyed not by physical force, but by being confronted with the full weight of their crimes. The idea that took shape in her mind was dangerous and probably impossible, but it was the only plan she could devise. If Adrian truly had retained some humanity, if his tears over Eleanor's fate had been real, then perhaps she could use his guilt as a weapon. That afternoon, she visited 3 places she'd never thought to enter: the town's small Catholic church, the dusty antique shop on Elm Street, and the hardware store where she purchased items that made the clerk look at her. Strangely, Father Murphy at St. Catherine's was surprisingly helpful once she explained she was researching folklore for a creative writing class. He provided her with holy water and blessed a simple wooden cross, his weathered face kind but curious about her sudden interest in such things. The antique shop yielded unexpected treasure, a collection of old photographs dating back to the town's founding, including several that showed the Blackthorne mansion in its early years. More importantly, she found a daguerreotype from 1847 that clearly showed Adrian standing beside a woman who could only be Eleanor. The sight of them together, so obviously in love, so unaware of the tragedy that awaited, made her chest ache with sympathy, even as it strengthened her resolve. At the hardware store, she purchased a wooden mallet, several stakes carved from ash wood, special ordered, the clerk explained, for a customer who never picked them up, and a small mirror that fit in her purse. She felt ridiculous buying such things, like an actor preparing for a role she never wanted to play. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote a letter she hoped she'd never need to send. Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and you've found this letter where I left it on my desk at school. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to believe me. Adrian Blackthorne, the man who lives in the old mansion, is a vampire. I know how that sounds, but it's true. He preys on lonely women, seducing them with promises of eternal love and immortality. What he doesn't tell them is that immortality comes with a terrible price. Within a century, they become monsters who feed on innocent people. He almost convinced me to accept his offer. I was prepared to give up my humanity for the chance to escape loneliness. Thank God I discovered the truth before it was too late. If something happens to me, please contact the state police. Tell them to search the mansion's basement. I believe you'll find evidence of his other victims, women who disappeared over the years, women whose families never learned what became of them. Take care of Amy Sinclair. She reminds me of myself at that age, and she deserves to grow up and make her own choices about love and life. With love and gratitude for your friendship, Elaine. She sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in her purse alongside the cross, holy water and mirror. Tomorrow, she would leave it on her desk at school before making her final visit to the Blackthorne mansion. Sleep proved impossible again. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eleanor's portrait, that beautiful, doomed face staring out at centuries of regret. How many other women had stood in that room, learning too late what they'd agreed to become? How many had Adrian watched transform from lovers into monsters? By dawn, she'd rehearsed her plan a dozen times. She would confront Adrian not with violence, she was no match for his supernatural strength, but with truth. She would force him to face what he'd become, what he'd done to Eleanor and the others. If his guilt was real, if any humanity remained in him, perhaps she could convince him to end his predatory existence voluntarily. And if not, if he tried to transform her by force or attacked her for threatening his secrets, she had the stakes and the cross. She might not survive the encounter, but at least future victims would be safe. The irony wasn't lost on her that this was the most courageous thing she'd ever attempted. Her entire life had been built around avoiding risk, choosing safety over adventure. Now at 62, she was planning to face down a creature from nightmares. But wasn't this exactly what she'd been teaching her students about choices and courage? About standing up for what's right even when it's dangerous? About not letting fear make decisions for you? At 8 o'clock, she drove to school and placed the sealed letter on her desk where Sarah would find it. Then she returned home to wait for darkness, when Adrian would be awake and she could make her final visit to the mansion. As the sun set over Millbrook, Elaine Morrison checked her weapons one last time, whispered a prayer to a god she wasn't sure was listening, and stepped out into the night to face the monster who had almost claimed her soul. The walk to the mansion felt like a journey to another world. With each step, She left behind the safety of her ordinary life and moved closer to a confrontation that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of every woman who might encounter Adrian's seductive lies in the years to come. The mansion loomed before her, its windows glowing with warm light that she now knew masked cold predatory instincts. Adrian was waiting. She could feel his presence like a weight in the air. This time, she wasn't coming as a potential victim drawn by promises of eternal love. She was coming as an adversary, armed with knowledge and determination, and the desperate hope that even monsters could be reasoned with if confronted with enough truth. The iron gate stood open, as if Adrian had been expecting her return. Perhaps he had. Perhaps he'd known all along that she wouldn't be able to simply walk away from what she'd learned. She pushed through the gate and walked up the cobblestone path, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. Behind her lay the life she'd built from caution and compromise. Ahead lay either victory or death, but no longer the grey half-existence she'd accepted for too many years. For the first time in her life, Elaine Morrison was truly, completely alive. Adrian was waiting in the foyer when she entered, his pale eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and resignation. He wore the same dark suit from their first meeting, but now it seemed less elegant and more like funeral attire. "I wondered if you would return," he said quietly. "I hoped you would, even though I know you have every right to hate me. I don't hate you." Elaine kept her distance, her hand resting on the cross in her purse. "I pity you." His face crumpled slightly at the words. "Perhaps that's worse than hatred. Adrian, I need you to listen to me very carefully." She moved closer but stayed near the door, ready to flee if necessary. "What you've been doing, what you did to Eleanor, to Margaret, to the others, it has to stop. You think I don't know that?" His voice carried centuries of self-loathing. "You think I haven't tried to find another way? I've spent 200 years researching, experimenting, hoping to find a cure for what I am, but you haven't stopped hunting. You haven't stopped seducing lonely women with promises you know you can't keep." Elaine's voice grew stronger. 3 days ago, you were ready to damn me to the same fate that destroyed Eleanor, because the alternative is an eternity of solitude. Adrian's composure cracked, revealing the desperate creature beneath. "Do you have any idea what it's like to watch century after century pass, to see everyone you could love grow old and die while you remain unchanged? To know that you're capable of love, but doomed never to keep it? So you decided that your loneliness justified destroying others? I decided that 90 years of love was better than none at all." His eyes blazed with ancient pain. "I decided that perhaps, with enough research, enough preparation, I could find a way to prevent the degeneration entirely. And if you couldn't, if I had accepted your offer and then started becoming a monster in 70 or 80 years, what then?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. Elaine reached into her purse and withdrew the daguerreotype she'd found at the antique shop. "Do you remember when this was taken?" He stared at the faded image of himself and Eleanor, his face going ashen. "Where did you find that?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that she loved you. I can see it in her face, the way she's looking at you. She trusted you completely." Elaine's voice softened with sympathy. "And you betrayed that trust by not telling her the truth about what she was agreeing to become. She knew the risks." "Did she? Did you tell her that she would eventually need to feed on innocent people to survive? Did you explain that she would slowly lose her humanity until she became something that could kill without conscience? The research suggested that with proper preparation, the research was wrong." Elaine's patience finally snapped. "Eleanor died a monster, didn't she? In the end, you had to kill the woman you loved because she became something that would have murdered innocent people." Adrian collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. "She begged me to end it. In her last moments of clarity, she looked at me with such horror, not at what I was about to do, but at what she had become. And Margaret, what happened to her when she chose to die rather than risk becoming a killer? His voice broke. "She asked me to hold her while the sun rose. She wanted to die watching light return to the world, knowing she would never have to hurt anyone. 3 women, Adrian. 3 women who loved you enough to trust you with their lives, and all 3 ended up dead because of your selfishness. You think I don't carry their deaths with me every day? He looked up at her with eyes that held the weight of centuries. You think I don't see their faces in my dreams, hear their voices calling my name? Then why continue? Why seek out another victim when you know how it will end? Adrian rose slowly, moving to the window where moonlight streamed through ancient glass. Because the alternative is worse than death. It's an existence without purpose, without connection, without hope. At least when I love someone, even briefly, I remember what it feels like to be human. But you're not human anymore, Adrian. You haven't been for centuries. Elaine moved closer, her fear replaced by determination. And you never will be again, no matter how many women you sacrifice to your loneliness. He turned to face her, and in his pale eyes she saw the truth he'd been hiding from himself for 200 years. "You're right," he whispered. "I've become exactly what Eleanor would have become if I hadn't stopped her. A predator who justifies feeding on innocence because I tell myself I have no choice. You do have a choice, Adrian. You've always had a choice. What choice? To spend eternity alone, watching the world change, while I remain a relic of the past." Elaine reached into her purse and withdrew the wooden stake, holding it steady despite her trembling hands. To end it, to stop hurting people, to join Eleanor and Margaret and the others in whatever peace awaits beyond this cursed existence. Adrian stared at the stake, then at her face, and slowly began to smile. "You would do it, wouldn't you?" Adrian's smile held no menace, only wonder. "You would actually try to kill me to protect others, if I have to." Elaine's voice was steady, though her hands shook around the wooden stake. "I won't let you hurt anyone else the way you hurt Eleanor." Remarkable. He stepped closer, and she raised the stake defensively. "For 62 years you chose safety over risk, comfort over courage. But when faced with a monster, you become the bravest person I've ever encountered." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But terror doesn't excuse inaction, not when innocent lives are at stake." Adrian nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "Do you know what drew me to you initially? It wasn't your loneliness. There are lonely people everywhere. It was the strength I sensed beneath your careful exterior, the untapped courage you'd spent decades hiding from." "Stop trying to manipulate me with compliments. I'm not manipulating you. I'm trying to tell you something important before—" He gestured toward the stake in her hands. "Before you do what needs to be done. Adrian, listen to me, please. Just once more." His voice carried the weight of centuries. "You asked me what choice I have, other than continuing this cursed existence or spending eternity alone. You're right that I've been a monster, that I've justified terrible things because I was afraid of solitude. But you've shown me a third option." Elaine frowned, not lowering the stake. "What do you mean?" "Redemption." The word hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. "Not through death, but through choosing to be better than what I've become. You can't change your nature. You'll always need to feed, always be tempted to prey on the innocent, perhaps. But I can choose how I feed, can't I? I can choose to take only what I need from willing donors, blood bank supplies, volunteers who understand what they're giving. I can choose to use my centuries of accumulated knowledge to help rather than harm." Despite herself, Elaine felt a flicker of hope. "And your loneliness will remain." His smile was sad but genuine. "But loneliness isn't a justification for evil, is it? It's simply a price I must pay for the choices I made centuries ago. I don't trust you." The words came out harsher than she intended. "How do I know this isn't another manipulation? Another way to get what you want?" "You don't." Adrian moved to his desk and withdrew a document, its pages covered in legal text. "But perhaps this will help convince you of my sincerity." Elaine accepted the papers warily, scanning the dense legal language. It was a will, she realized. Adrian's will, leaving his entire estate to various charities and educational institutions. At the bottom, dated just hours ago, was his signature. "I spent today preparing for this conversation," he explained. "If you decide I'm too dangerous to live, if you use that stake, my death will at least accomplish some good. The mansion will become a library. My wealth will fund scholarships for students like your Amy Sinclair, and if I don't kill you, then I'll sign another document tomorrow, a binding contract with the local blood bank to supply my needs legally and ethically. I'll use my resources to help this community instead of preying on it, and I'll spend whatever centuries remain to me atoning for the lives I've destroyed. Elaine studied his face, searching for deception and finding only weary honesty. What about your loneliness? What happens when it becomes unbearable again? Then I'll remember this conversation. I'll remember Eleanor's face in her final moments, and Margaret's courage in choosing death over becoming a monster. I'll remember you, standing in my foyer with a wooden stake, ready to risk everything to protect people you've never met. His voice grew stronger. And if that's not enough, if I ever again consider damning an innocent person to ease my solitude, I'll use this. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew another stake, this one carved from what appeared to be centuries-old oak. Eleanor made this during her final week, when she still had enough humanity left to understand what she was becoming. She gave it to me as a gift, a way to ensure I would never become what she became. You've kept it all this time. As a reminder, as a promise, as insurance against my weaker nature. He set the stake on the desk between them. I offer you the same choice I gave myself centuries ago. Trust that I can change or end the threat I represent. Either way, the killing stops tonight. Elaine looked from the stake in her hands to the one on the desk, then to Adrian's face. In his ancient eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not the desperate manipulation of a predator, but the genuine remorse of a man who had finally accepted the full weight of his sins. "If I let you live," she said quietly, "and you break your promise, if you hurt even one more person, then you'll have been right to trust the stake over my words." He moved to the window, presenting his back to her in a gesture of absolute vulnerability. "The choice is yours, Elaine Morrison. It always has been." In the silence that followed, she realized that this decision would define not just his future, but her own. Would she choose the certainty of violence or the risk of mercy? The stake felt heavy in her trembling hands. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed midnight, its deep notes echoing through the mansion like a funeral toll. Elaine stood frozen, the wooden stake heavy in her hands, weighing Adrian's words against the images of Eleanor and Margaret and the unnamed third woman who had paid for his loneliness with their lives. "How do I know you mean it?" she whispered. "How do I know this isn't just another seduction, another way to get what you want?" Adrian remained at the window, his back still turned to her. "You don't. Faith, by definition, requires believing without certainty. I'm asking you to have faith in the possibility that even monsters can choose to become something better." Elaine thought of Amy Sinclair, brave enough to audition for the play despite her fears. She thought of the students she'd taught over the years, young people who had faced difficult choices and sometimes chosen courage over comfort. She thought of the lesson she'd taught just days ago about roads diverging in a yellow wood. "If I choose to trust you," she said slowly, "what does that future look like? Not for you, for the people of this town. For other women who might catch your attention, I become what I should have been centuries ago, a guardian rather than a predator. I use my resources to improve this community, my knowledge to educate, my existence to protect rather than prey upon." He turned slightly, showing her his profile. "And I live with the loneliness that is the just consequence of my choices. Alone forever. Perhaps, or perhaps someday, I'll encounter someone who can accept what I am while knowing the full truth about what I've done. Someone who chooses companionship with a redeemed monster rather than the lie of love built on deception." His smile was sad. "But that's not your burden to bear, Elaine. Your choice is simpler. Do you believe redemption is possible, or do you believe some sins are unforgivable?" The question hit her like a physical blow. How many times had she taught literature that dealt with exactly this theme? How many essays had she graded about characters who faced moral choices between justice and mercy? "Show me," she said finally. "Show you what?" "The basement. The evidence of what you've done." If I'm going to make this choice, I need to see all of it. Adrian's shoulders sagged, but he nodded. Follow me. He led her through corridors she hadn't seen before, down stone steps that descended into the foundation of the ancient house. The basement was surprisingly clean and modern, but in one corner stood 3 marble monuments, not tombstones, but memorials bearing names and dates. Elaine Blackthorne, 1847-1936, beloved companion Margaret Ross, 1925-2000. Brave soul who chose her own ending, Catherine Mills, 1935-2010. Forgive me, I brought their bodies here, Adrian said quietly. Gave them proper burials, proper monuments. It seemed the least I could do. Elaine approached the memorials, reading the inscriptions carved in elegant script. Each bore a different epitaph, but all carried the same undertone of regret. Catherine was the first. Yes, she lasted only 60 years before the change began. I was unprepared, inexperienced. Her death taught me that my research was insufficient, that I was playing with forces I didn't understand. But you continued anyway. I told myself each time would be different, that I'd learned enough to prevent the degeneration, that love would be stronger than hunger. He touched Eleanor's memorial gently. I was wrong every time. Elaine stood among the monuments to Adrian's failures and felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. Here was the evidence of his crimes, but also proof that he had honored their memories rather than simply disposing of their bodies like a true monster would. The blood bank contract, she said finally. Show it to me. They returned upstairs, where Adrian produced a document he'd apparently prepared while waiting for her arrival. The contract was detailed, binding him to obtain sustenance only through legal medical channels and to submit to regular monitoring by the hospital administration. Dr. Peterson at Millbrook General has been a friend for 30 years, Adrian explained. He's agreed to oversee my dietary requirements in exchange for a substantial donation to the hospital's cancer research program. He knows what you are. He knows I have a rare medical condition that requires regular blood transfusions. The truth seemed unnecessarily complicated. Elaine read through the contract carefully, noting the stringent limitations and monitoring requirements. If Adrian broke any of its terms, his funding would be revoked and the authorities notified. And if you violate this agreement, then you use Eleanor's stake, as you should have tonight if you'd been wiser. Adrian moved to the desk and picked up the ancient wooden weapon. This goes with you. Insurance against my weaker nature. I can't. You can and you must. You're the only person alive who knows the full truth about what I am and what I've done. That makes you responsible for ensuring I keep my word. He pressed the stake into her reluctant hands. If I ever again threaten an innocent person, use it. Promise me. Elaine looked down at the worn wood, imagining Eleanor's hands crafting this final gift in her last days of humanity. I promise. Then we have an understanding. 6 months later, Elaine stood in the newly opened Blackthorne Community Library, watching children explore the reading rooms that had once housed Adrian's private collection. The mansion had been renovated but retained its Gothic beauty, now serving as a center of learning rather than isolation. Adrian kept his word. The blood bank reported regular, modest withdrawals. No women disappeared. The monster had become, if not human, then at least harmless. She still taught at the high school. But now she also volunteered at the library on weekends, helping patrons navigate the vast collection Adrian had donated. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him in the early evening hours, shelving books or discussing literature with elderly visitors who didn't know they were speaking with someone who had witnessed the events they were reading about. They nodded politely when their paths crossed, but maintained their distance. The stake he'd given her remained in her desk drawer at home, a reminder that redemption was possible but never guaranteed. Amy Sinclair had graduated and gone on to study theater at the State University. In her last letter, she'd written, "Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to choose courage over comfort. Some choices change everything. Indeed they do, Elaine thought, watching the autumn light filter through the library's stained glass windows. Some choices change everything, sometimes for the better. If you're brave enough to believe in the possibility of grace. The empty picture frame still sat on her kitchen table, but now it no longer represented absence. It represented potential, space for memories yet to be made, relationships yet to be formed, choices yet to be chosen. She was 63 now, graying and lined, but no longer invisible. Students sought her out for advice. Colleagues invited her to dinner. The town librarian had become a friend, and sometimes, on quiet evenings when she walked past the mansion-turned library, she felt grateful for the choice she'd made that midnight 6 months ago. Not to trust blindly in love, but to believe wisely in the possibility of redemption. It had made all the difference.